The thing about Jenna was that she'd always been a bit of a free spirit. I used to love that about her. How she could turn a mundane Saturday into an adventure. How she'd surprise me with impromptu road trips or backyard picnics with candles and cheap wine. After 10 years of marriage, you start to miss that kind of spontaneity. Or at least I did. When she told me about the girls' weekend at the beach, I barely blinked. In fact, I was glad she was taking some time for herself. "You deserve it," I'd said, kissing her goodbye in our driveway, suitcase already loaded in the trunk of her Honda. She'd smiled, a little too bright, and I figured it was just excitement. The weekend passed slowly. I worked on the deck that needed restaining since last summer, binged a few episodes of a detective series I'd been meaning to catch up on, and drank a few too many beers alone. I missed Jenna's chatter, the way she'd sit cross-legged on the couch, feet tucked under her, telling me about the drama at her job or the new bakery that opened downtown. Our house felt empty without her, too quiet. When she got back Sunday evening, sun-kissed and tired, she smelled like coconut oil and ocean air. I pulled her in, breathing her in, and for a second, everything felt right. Normal. She showed me a few photos on her phone. Beach selfies with her friends, cocktails by the water, a blurry shot of the sunset. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, looking back, I wonder if her hands shook just a little or if I imagined that part. Life settled back into routine. Jenna went back to work, and I buried myself in projects around the house. It wasn't until a few days later, when I logged into our shared cloud account to pull up some old photos, that everything came crashing down. The syncing was automatic, something I'd set up years ago. Mostly, it was full of pictures of our dog, family BBQs, and blurry concert videos Jenna took from the nosebleed seats. But that day, as I scrolled past photos of her beach trip, one image stopped me cold. Jenna, laughing, her head tipped back, hair wild in the ocean breeze. And beside her, a man I hadn't seen in years. Jake. The same Jake who'd been my college roommate. The same Jake who'd cost me a six-figure business deal 5 years ago with a few well-placed lies. The same Jake who, last I'd heard, had moved out west after tanking his own career. I hadn't thought about him in years, hadn't wanted to. Yet there he was, arms slung casually around Jenna's shoulders like he belonged there. My mouth went dry. I swiped to the next photo, then the next, each one twisting the knife a little deeper. That night, lying beside Jenna in the dark, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. I kept thinking about that smile on her face, the way Jake's hand rested on her hip, the way she hadn't mentioned seeing anyone else at the beach. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows from the streetlight outside stretching long and jagged, and for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't recognize the woman sleeping next to me. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to know more. So I started digging. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that picture. Jenna's head tipped back, laughter frozen mid-moment, Jake's hand resting possessively on her hip. It was like finding a rotten floorboard and realizing the whole foundation might be shot. I spent most of the night on the couch, phone in hand, scrolling through our cloud account with a growing sense of dread. There were more photos. A lot more. It started innocently enough. Group shots of Jenna and her friends in beach chairs, sunburned noses and oversized sunglasses. But mixed in were pictures she definitely hadn't shown me. Shots of her and Jake at some beachside bar, heads bent close, drinks in hand. Another of them on a pier at sunset, her hand curled around his arm. The worst one, the one that had my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone, was a mirror selfie from what had to be her hotel room. Jenna in a sundress, hair still damp, lips pulled into a smile I hadn't seen in years. And in the reflection behind her, Jake sprawled out on the bed, shirtless, smirking at the camera. My stomach lurched. I bolted for the bathroom, barely making it before my dinner came back up. I knelt there on the tile for what felt like hours, cold sweat trickling down my back, the pictures burned into my eyelids. When I finally staggered back to the couch, I sat in the dark, clutching my phone until my fingers ached. My first thought was to wake her up, demand answers, scream until my throat went raw. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of what she might say, or worse, what she wouldn't. By morning, I had a plan. When Jenna came downstairs, hair tousled and wearing my old college sweatshirt, I forced myself to smile. I even managed to kiss her temple as she passed, though the smell of her coconut shampoo made my stomach twist. She smiled back, sleep soft and warm, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself I was wrong, that maybe there was some reasonable explanation. Then she reached for her phone, fingers moving a little too quickly, a little too eagerly, and that brief flicker of hope guttered out. "What's your day look like?" I asked, keeping my voice steady as I poured her coffee. 2 sugars, just how she liked. God, I hated how well I still knew that. She hesitated just a fraction of a second, long enough to make my pulse spike, then shrugged. "Busy. Meetings, mostly. Might grab lunch with Lisa if I get a break." "Sounds good," I said lightly, though my jaw ached from clenching it. "Tell her I said hi." She smiled, leaning in to press a quick kiss to my cheek, and I nearly flinched. "I will. Don't work too hard. Okay?" I watched her pull out of the driveway, taillights fading into the morning haze, then let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone, fingers hovering over the call icon. I hesitated, thumb brushing the screen, before finally tapping the one contact I never thought I'd need. Dave, my old college buddy who now worked as a private investigator. We hadn't talked much in recent years. Life had a way of getting in the way, but Dave picked up on the second ring. "Tom? Man, it's been a while," he said, voice warm with surprise. "What's up?" I swallowed hard, trying to dislodge the lump in my throat. I need your help. It's about Jenna." Dave's tone shifted immediately, professional and sharp.
"I'm listening."
The next few days were hell. I dragged myself through work, barely focusing, jumping every time my phone buzzed. Nights were worse. Lying beside Jenna in the dark, my back to her, fighting the urge to demand answers. Her hand would drift to my back sometimes, light and warm, and I had to bite my lip to keep from flinching. Dave was efficient, at least. By Thursday, he had something. "She's been meeting him at the Montgomery Hotel," he told me over the phone, voice grim. "Room 214. Checked in twice last week, both times during her lunch breaks." He paused, and I could hear the hesitation in his silence. "Tom, man, I've got photos. Are you sure you want to?" "I want to see them," I snapped, harsher than I intended. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heel of my hand against my forehead.
"Sorry."
"Just send them." They came through a minute later, and I forced myself to look. Jenna, leaning against Jake in the hotel lobby, fingers twisted in his shirt. Another of them entering the room, his hand resting low on her back. The worst was the last. Through a half-open door, Jenna's head tipped back, eyes closed, Jake's hands gripping her waist. Her wedding ring glinted mockingly in the low light. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped my phone. My vision blurred, red creeping in at the edges. "Tom!" Dave's voice was distant, tinny. "You still there?" I forced myself to breathe, to swallow the bile clawing its way up my throat. "Yeah," I rasped.
Yeah."
"I'm sorry, man," he said, soft and sincere. "What are you gonna do?" I stared at the photos, thumb brushing over Jenna's face, my mind spinning. I should have been devastated, broken. But beneath the shock and pain was something darker, colder. "I don't know yet," I said finally, voice flat. "But I'll think of something." And God help them both when I did. I didn't confront Jenna. Not that night. Not the next day either. As much as I wanted to, as much as my hands itched to grab her phone, to shove those photos in her face and demand why, I held back. The thing about betrayal is that it rots everything it touches, and if I was going to cut out the infection, I needed to see how far it had spread. So I waited. I smiled when she smiled, kissed her goodnight, and played the part of the oblivious husband so well that sometimes I almost believed it myself. But every time she left the room, I was on my phone, fingers flying, digging deeper. The first crack came 2 days later, a Thursday evening. Jenna had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, notifications from her email pinging softly as I loaded the dishwasher. I glanced at it out of habit, fully prepared to look away, until I saw the subject line. This weekend, can't wait to see you. My heart lurched. I glanced over my shoulder, listening for the sound of Jenna's shower upstairs, then swiped the mousepad. Her inbox blinked open, rows of unread emails stretching down the screen. Most were work-related, but half a dozen were from the same address, jaker81@gmail.com. My hands shook as I clicked on the latest one. Can't wait to see you again. Last weekend was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Same place? A reply from Jenna sat just below it, timestamped for earlier that afternoon. Same place. God, I miss you. My breath left me in a rush, hands curling into fists so tight my knuckles went white. I forced myself to click back, to open another, and another. By the fourth one, my stomach was twisted in knots so tight I could barely breathe. You looked so beautiful on the beach. He never deserved you. I can't believe we have to wait another week. Wish I could just take you away from all of this. Does he suspect anything? And Jenna's replies, sickeningly sweet, had my vision blurring with rage. Of course not. He's so busy with work, he hardly notices anything. God, I wish you could. I can't stand pretending. Soon, baby. Promise. I staggered back, grip slipping from the counter, and for a moment, I thought I might actually pass out. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts crashing into each other so fast I couldn't grab hold of a single one. But one question cut through the noise, sharp and insistent. How long? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jenna's smile. The way she'd kissed me goodbye that morning, fingers brushing my jaw like she actually gave a damn. And all I could think was how many times she'd done that with Jake's hands still fresh on her skin. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep, slipping out of bed and down to my office, the glow from my laptop screen painting everything in sickly blue light. I pulled up our phone records, fingers trembling as I scrolled through pages of call logs and text history. There it was, months' worth of calls to an unlisted number, always during her lunch breaks or late at night when I worked late. Some lasted seconds, others stretched for hours. My pulse hammered in my ears as I copied the number, pasting it into a reverse lookup site. Name, Jake Turner. Location, Cedar Ridge Apartments. My mouth went dry. Cedar Ridge was less than 20 miles away, just off the interstate. My hands clenched so tight around the mouse I half expected it to shatter. I stared at the address, throat tight, mind spinning. If I left now, I could be there in less than 30 minutes. I could confront him, demand answers, wipe that smug smirk off his face for good. But no, that wouldn't do. Not yet. Instead, I did what any rational man would. I called Dave. Jesus, Tom. It's 3:30 in the morning, he grumbled, voice rough with sleep. This better be good. It's him, I rasped, the words barely more than a growl. It's Jake. He's been meeting her for months. Dave swore under his breath, something low and vicious. Bastard, he muttered. All right, listen. Don't do anything stupid. Just give me the address. I'll get surveillance on him, track their meetings. We'll get everything. Fine. I bit out, chest heaving. Do it. Dave was efficient, I'd give him that. By Saturday morning, my inbox was full of photos. Time-stamped, dated, and each one hitting harder than the last. Jake meeting Jenna at the Montgomery Hotel, arms slung casually over her shoulders. Jenna slipping out of his apartment building at dawn, hair mussed, wearing the same sundress from the day before. One of them in a corner booth at a bar I used to take her to, his hand resting low on her back, her head tipped to his shoulder. But the worst, the one that made my vision go black around the edges, was taken just 2 days ago. Jenna, standing on Jake's front porch, fingers twisted nervously in her shirt. The front door cracked open, and there was Jake, grinning, leaning casually against the frame. He pulled her in, one hand tangled in her hair, the other fisting in the back of her shirt. She melted into him, arms wrapping around his neck, and my heart tore clean in two. I dropped the printouts, breath coming in short, ragged bursts. My chest burned, a fire spreading through my veins, searing and white-hot. This wasn't a fling. Wasn't some drunken mistake she regretted. This was planned, deliberate months of lies and late-night whispers and stolen kisses in dark hotel rooms. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd chosen him. A sharp knock shattered the silence, and I flinched, head snapping up. Jenna's face peeked around the office door, eyes soft and tired. "Hey!" she murmured, voice hushed. "You okay? You've been in here all morning." I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to unclench, the rage to settle back beneath my skin. "Yeah," I lied, voice hoarse. "Just work stuff. I'll be out soon." She smiled, soft and sad. And God, I wanted to scream. "Okay," she said quietly. "Don't work too hard." The door clicked shut behind her, and I stared at it, chest heaving, the photos scattered across my desk like a crime scene. If she thought this was over, she was dead wrong. The thing about revenge is that it takes time. You can't rush it. You can't let the anger get the best of you, make you sloppy. You have to be patient, methodical, like a hunter stalking prey. And I was more than willing to wait if it meant watching them burn. So I played my part. I kissed Jenna goodbye each morning, pretended to listen when she rambled about work or the latest drama with her sister. I smiled and nodded and even managed to hold her some nights without flinching. If she noticed the distance, the way my hands clenched a little too tight or how my eyes never quite met hers, she didn't mention it. But beneath it all, I was unraveling. Dave was a godsend. Every night, he'd call with updates, his voice a low rumble in the dark as I sat on the back porch, chain-smoking my way through half a pack. Jenna thought I was cutting back, had been nagging me for months to quit. But at this point, I figured lung cancer was the least of my worries. She met him again. Dave muttered one night, barely past midnight. I pinched the bridge of my nose, eyes squeezed shut. Montgomery Hotel. They checked in around noon, checked out 3 hours later. "Got photos if you want them." I didn't. I already knew what they'd show. Jenna, hair mussed and eyes bright, fingers laced with his as they slipped out the side entrance. Jake, smug grin stretched across his face, hand resting low on her back. I could see it all in my head, vivid enough to make my stomach churn. "Anything else?" I rasped, voice tight. Dave hesitated. "Yeah, she's been moving money around. Not a lot, couple hundred here, 1,000 there. But it's all going to the same account. Looks like she's planning something." I gritted my teeth, fingers twitching around my lighter. "How much so far?" "Close to 10 grand, he said grimly. "Might want to check your accounts, man." I bit back a curse, pinching the bridge of my nose until stars burst behind my eyelids. This wasn't just some fling. This was premeditated, calculated. She was planning an escape. Our money, our home, our life, all tied up with him. "Tom," Dave said, voice softening. "You gotta tell her, man. You can't keep this up." I barked out a laugh, bitter and sharp. "Oh, I'll tell her," I muttered, flicking ash onto the porch. "Just not yet." By the following week, I'd gone through every account we shared. Savings, checking, the emergency fund we'd built for when we finally got around to having kids. All of it was leaking cash. A few hundred at a time, just small enough not to set off alerts, but together it added up to nearly 15 grand gone without a trace. I spent hours tracing it back, eyes bloodshot and gritty from staring at spreadsheets, fingers flying over the keyboard. The money led to a joint account at some no-name bank across town, one I'd never seen before. Both of their names were on it, hers and his. I stared at the screen, a muscle jumping in my jaw, and imagined flipping the dining table straight through the window. She didn't just betray me, she'd replaced me. The next morning, Jenna came downstairs in one of my old flannels, hair piled messily on her head, yawning and stretching like she didn't have a care in the world. She leaned over to kiss my cheek, soft and warm, and I fought the urge to recoil. "You're up early," she murmured, voice thick with sleep. "Everything okay?" "Couldn't sleep," I said lightly, forcing a smile. "Figured I'd get some work done." She hummed, grabbing a mug and pouring herself coffee, and I watched her fingers curl around the handle, her wedding ring glinting in the sunlight. My chest tightened, rage simmering low and hot beneath my ribs, but I swallowed it down. "Any plans today?" I asked casually, stirring sugar into my own mug. She hesitated just a fraction of a second, barely enough to notice. "Oh, yeah," she said, too bright. "Lunch with Lisa. We might hit that new boutique afterward." I smiled, all teeth. "Sounds fun. Say hi for me." She laughed, light and sweet, and I wanted to rip the sound from her throat. "I will," she promised, leaning up to kiss me again, and I forced myself to stay still, to meet her eyes without flinching. I followed her. I'd never tailed anyone before, but it wasn't hard. Jenna had always been predictable: routes, habits, everything timed to the minute. She turned left out of our neighborhood, her Honda glinting in the sunlight, and I hung back 2 cars, heart pounding against my ribs. She didn't go to Lisa's. Instead, she drove to a park on the other side of town, pulling into a secluded lot half hidden by trees. I parked a block away, watched through binoculars as she stepped out, smoothing her skirt, eyes flicking nervously to the entrance. 5 minutes later, Jake's Mustang pulled in, rumbling low and familiar. He climbed out, sauntering over to her, that same smug grin stretching his mouth. I gripped the steering wheel, blood roaring in my ears, nails biting into the leather. She melted into his arms like it was nothing, like it was natural, fingers twisting in his hair as he dipped his head, lips brushing hers. I watched, breath coming in shallow pants, teeth grinding so hard my jaw ached. They stayed there for a while, leaning against his car, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Jake's hand rested low on her waist, fingers splayed possessively, and Jenna leaned into it, eyes bright and fond. My vision blurred red. Eventually, they climbed into his car and pulled out, tires crunching softly on gravel. I waited until they were out of sight, breath hitching, hands still white-knuckled on the wheel, and forced myself to move. I followed them to a house, small, nondescript, half hidden behind hedges on the edge of town. They disappeared inside, the door swinging shut with a quiet click, and I sat there in the silence, staring at the dark windows, chest heaving. She didn't come out for 3 hours. That night, when she came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey sweating between my palms. She slipped through the door around 9 p.m., a sheepish smile already pulling at her lips. "Sorry," she sighed, setting her purse down. "Lost track of time. Lisa wanted to try on half the store." She leaned in to kiss my temple, fingers warm on my shoulder, and I had to fight the urge to shove her away. My stomach churned, whiskey sour on my tongue, but I forced a smile, light and easy. "No worries," I said softly, tipping the glass to my lips. "Just glad you're home." Her smile widened, soft and relieved, and God, I wanted to put my fist through the wall. If she wanted to lie, that was fine. I'd let her spin her web, wrap herself so tight she couldn't see straight. Because when it all came crashing down, when I finally ripped the mask off, I wanted her to know exactly who did it. The worst part about betrayal is how it makes you question everything. Every smile, every kiss, every casual touch across the kitchen counter. Suddenly, it's all tainted, corrupted. Even the memories, the good ones, start to feel like lies. I couldn't look at Jenna without wondering how many times she'd stood there, eyes soft and warm, while thinking about him. But the anger, the blinding rage that had settled in my bones, that was the part one could use. I clung to it, fed it with every text message I intercepted, every email I pulled from her trash folder late at night when she was sleeping beside me, oblivious. Every little detail only sharpened my resolve. By the end of the week, I had a folder full of evidence, printouts, screenshots, bank statements. I'd put a lock on my office door, and Jenna hadn't questioned it. Not that she had much time to. She was too busy planning her next lunch date with Jake. And that's when I found the contract. Dave called Saturday morning, voice sharp and urgent. "You're not gonna like this," he muttered, static crackling on the line. "I pulled Jake's financials, just like you asked. Found something interesting. I scrubbed a hand down my face, exhaustion tugging at the edges of my mind. Spit it out. He started a new business, small consulting firm. Except it's a shell, Tom. No clients, no revenue, just a name on paper and a bank account with over 50 grand sitting in it. My grip tightened on the phone, heart pounding. And the deposits are all from the same place, Dave said grimly. Your wife's account. I squeezed my eyes shut, bile rising in my throat. That son of a... It gets worse, Dave cut in. One of those deposits came from a joint account under your name. About 15 grand, transferred in small amounts over the past 6 months. Looks like she forged your signature. I lurched to my feet, heart slamming against my ribs. She what? Sent you the documents, he said quietly. It's all there. I dropped into my office chair, hands trembling as I yanked the laptop open. My inbox blinked back at me, Dave's name bold and bright at the top of the list. I clicked, breath held, and stared as PDFs loaded one after another. Bank statements, transfer authorizations, a forged signature that looked so close to mine it made my head spin. But the worst, the one that sent ice sliding down my spine, was the contract. A business contract between Jake's consulting firm and Landry and Company, the same real estate developer that had cut me out of that deal 5 years ago. The one Jake had undercut me on, the one that nearly tanked my company. A deal worth over $200,000. I sank back, heart thundering, cold seeping into my bones. This wasn't just about Jenna, about stolen kisses in dark hotel rooms. This was revenge, calculated, deliberate. Jake hadn't just taken my wife. He was using her to gut my business from the inside out. And Jenna, God, Jenna had been helping him, handing over our money, feeding him information, all while curling up beside me at night like nothing was wrong. I bolted for the bathroom, barely making it before I doubled over the sink, retching until my throat burned. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Not with my heart still pounding in my ears. My hands still shaking so bad I couldn't hold a glass of water without spilling it. Instead, I called Dave back, voice raw and hoarse. Get me everything, I ground out. Emails, phone calls, every conversation they've had for the past year. I want it all. You got it, he said quietly. Tom, just do it. I snapped, slamming the phone down. I spent the rest of the day pacing the office, fingers twitching, every breath like glass in my lungs. I wanted to put my fist through the wall, tear down every wedding photo in the hallway, rip the goddamn ring off my finger and fling it into the trash where it belonged. But I didn't, couldn't, not yet. By the time Jenna got home that evening, I'd forced my hands to steady, locked the office door behind me, and downed enough whiskey to keep the tremors at bay. She breezed in with a bright smile, grocery bags in hand, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Hey you, she called, towing off her shoes in the hallway. Dinner in or out tonight? I managed a smile, teeth aching with the effort. Whatever you want. She laughed, light and sweet, and my fingers twitched with the urge to slam her against the wall, demand answers, watch that smile crumble. Instead, I took a breath, forced my hands steady, and crossed the room to help with the groceries. Long day? She asked, leaning into my side, fingers warm against my chest. I hummed, pressing a kiss to her temple, and ignored the way my stomach churned. You could say that. She pulled back, eyes soft and warm, thumb brushing over my collar. Well, I'm glad you're home, she murmured. And God, I wanted to scream. By Monday, Dave had everything. He called late that night, voice tight with barely contained anger. Got the emails, he muttered. Text messages, too. You were right. They've been planning this for months. Setting up that shell company, siphoning off your accounts, making it look like bad business decisions on your part. My jaw clenched, fingers curling around the phone. Anything else? He hesitated. A pause so long I nearly barked at him to spit it out. Yeah, he said finally, voice dark. There's one more thing. Jake's been shopping around for a new partner. Business partner, I mean. He's pitching them your company. Your clients, your contracts, Everything. My heart stopped. What? Looks like he's planning a takeover, Dave said quietly. Hostile, if it comes to that. My vision tunneled, rage searing hot and blinding. My hand ached with how tight I gripped the phone, knuckles bone white. Get me everything, I rasped. I want every single name he's talked to. If he so much as bought a coffee, I want to know about it. You got it, Dave muttered. And Tom. What? I snapped, harsher than I meant to. Pause, soft and hesitant. Be careful, he said finally. You're playing with fire. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Oh, I know, I murmured. And I plan to burn them both to the ground. Jenna was already asleep when I finally crawled into bed that night, limbs heavy and numb. Her head rested on my pillow, blonde hair splayed out like a halo. One hand curled softly against her chest. The ring on her finger gleamed in the moonlight, a cruel reminder of every promise she'd shattered. I stared at her for a long time, chest tight, hands itching to reach out, to shake her awake and demand how long she'd been lying, why I hadn't been enough. But the anger swallowed the hurt, turned it hard and cold and steady, and I forced myself to lie back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Let her sleep, let her dream. Because when I was done, she'd wake up to a nightmare. By the time I woke up the next morning, Jenna was already gone. Her side of the bed was cold, sheets smoothed flat, as if she'd never been there at all. For a second, I just stared at the ceiling, blinking blearily at the sunlight slanting through the blinds, and for a single, blissful moment, I forgot. But then reality came crashing back, sharp and cruel. I squeezed my eyes shut, jaw clenched, fingers fisting in the sheets. 15 minutes later, I was in the shower, water scalding hot, trying to burn the ache from my chest. By the time I made it downstairs, Jenna's car was gone. I paused in the kitchen, blinking at the empty driveway, her favorite coffee mug still sitting half full on the counter, lipstick smudged around the rim. My gut twisted, that familiar flare of rage simmering low and hot. I pulled out my phone, thumb brushing over the screen, and hesitated. The urge to call Dave was overwhelming, to demand he track her, tell me exactly where she'd run off to this time. But I forced it back, shoving the phone into my pocket. Let her have her secrets. I had bigger plans. By noon, I was sitting in the corner booth of a rundown diner 3 towns over, fingers drumming absently against the chipped formica. The coffee was bitter enough to strip paint, but it did the job, kept me alert and sharp. I watched the door, nerves fraying with every second that ticked past. 10 minutes late, Dave slid into the booth across from me. Ty Askew, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He dropped a manila envelope on the table, nudging it forward with 2 fingers. There's everything, he muttered, voice rough. Emails, texts, bank records. You weren't wrong. Jake's been planning this for a while. He's got a meeting with a potential buyer next week. One of your old clients. I stared at the envelope, heart pounding, but didn't move to open it. Who? I rasped. Danvers, Dave said grimly. From the Oakland project. My mouth went dry. Danvers Construction was the client I'd lost to Jake's backstabbing 5 years ago, the one that had almost put me under. Rage seared white-hot, fingers curling around the coffee mug so tight it nearly cracked. I forced myself to breathe, to swallow the bile clawing its way up my throat. What else? Jake's been siphoning money from your accounts for months. Looks like he had Jenna set up automatic transfers. Small amounts spread out enough to fly under the radar. But it's all there. He paused, jaw tightening. And Jenna's in on it. All the way. Emails, texts. She's been feeding him information for months. Client lists, contract details, everything. I closed my eyes, a low roar building in my ears. God, I'd been so stupid, so blind. I bit down hard enough to taste blood, fury drowning out the hurt. Tom, Dave said quietly, voice hesitant. There's something else. I looked up sharply, eyes narrowed. Spit it out. He hesitated, scrubbing a hand over his jaw. I pulled Jenna's phone records like you asked, he said slowly. But it's not just Jake she's been talking to. My heart stuttered. What? There's another number, he muttered, flipping open the file and sliding a page across the table. Frequent calls, usually late at night, sometimes right after you've called or texted. It's listed under a burner phone, but I ran a trace. He met my eyes, expression grim. It's Landry. The name hit like a punch to the gut. I sucked in a sharp breath, head spinning. Landry, I rasped. As in the same bastard who undercut you on that Westview deal last year, Dave growled. Looks like Jake's been feeding him your financials. If I had to guess, I'd say they're planning a buyout, hostile takeover, maybe even bankruptcy. And Jenna's been helping them do it. The room swayed. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, blood roaring in my ears. This wasn't just about Jake, about Jenna's lies and stolen kisses. This was a goddamn conspiracy. For a long moment I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. When I finally managed to unclench my jaw, the words came out flat and dead. She knows, I said hoarsely. She knows everything. Dave's eyes softened, pity lurking behind the exhaustion. Tom, I want to burn them. I bit out, voice trembling with rage. All of them. I want them to lose everything. He hesitated, eyes flicking over my face. You sure about that? He asked quietly. Once we start, there's no going back. I stared at the manila envelope, chest heaving, Jenna's smile seared into the back of my eyelids, the feel of her fingers curling in my shirt, lips warm and soft. And beneath it, Jake's smirk, the way his hands had fit around her waist, so goddamn familiar. My jaw clenched, teeth grinding hard enough to crack. I've never been more sure of anything, I growled. Dave sighed, a long, weary exhale, and nodded. All right, he muttered. I'll start making calls. That night, Jenna came home late again. I watched from the kitchen window as she pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing through the dark, her silhouette barely visible behind the glass. My hands shook around the whiskey glass, ice clinking softly, but I forced them steady, eyes fixed on the door. She slipped in, toeing off her heels, hair tousled and makeup smudged, smelling faintly of coconut and cigarettes. I turned, leaning casually against the counter, fingers drumming absently. You're late, I said lightly, swirling the whiskey. Dinner's cold. She flinched, just barely, before plastering on a bright smile. Sorry, she sighed, setting her purse down. Lisa wouldn't stop talking, lost track of time. I hummed, lifting the glass to my lips. Seems like you do that a lot lately. Her smile faltered, eyes darting away. You know how she is, she said, voice too bright. Anyway, I'll just heat something up. Don't bother. I cut in, setting the glass down with a sharp click. I already ate. She hesitated, teeth worrying her bottom lip, fingers twisting in the strap of her purse. For a second, something like guilt flashed in her eyes, raw and uncertain, but it was gone before I could grab hold of it. Well, she murmured, voice soft.
I'm sorry.
I stared at her, chest tight, rage simmering low and dark. Yeah, I said quietly, forcing a smile. Me too, because when the walls came crashing down, I wanted her to remember this moment, this lie, this smile. I wanted her to understand exactly who'd torn her world apart. And God help her when she finally did. Revenge is a lot like chess. You can't just move pieces blindly and hope for the best. You have to think 10 steps ahead. Anticipate every move your opponent might make. Lay traps in places they'd never think to look. And when the time comes, you don't strike fast. You draw it out, let them see the pieces falling one by one until they're cornered, defenseless. I spent the next week laying the groundwork. Dave kept feeding me intel, phone records, bank statements, photos that made my blood boil but also gave me what I needed. By Thursday, I had enough evidence to bury Jake, Jenna, and every last one of their accomplices so deep they'd never claw their way out. But that wasn't enough. I wanted them to see it coming, to understand exactly who was behind the wreckage of their lives. I wanted them to feel it, and for that I needed patience. The first move was subtle, just a whisper in the right ear. I reached out to Greg Hensley, one of my oldest clients, a real estate developer with a ruthless streak and enough connections to sink a small country. He owed me a favor. Hensley, he answered gruffly, voice muffled by what sounded like traffic. Hell, Tom, it's been a while. Thought you'd retired. Not yet, I said coolly, fingers drumming absently on my desk. I need a favor. Pause, a low chuckle. This ought to be good. I smirked, eyes narrowing. I need you to pull out of the Oakmont project. Silence, then a low whistle. That's $1 million deal, he drawled. You know that, right? I'll double it, I said flatly. And I'll owe you one. Another pause, then a bark of laughter. Hell, for that kind of money, I'd pull out of my own wedding, he snorted. Consider it done. That was one domino down. The second was trickier. I waited until Jenna left for her usual lunch date. Hair curled, lipstick a shade too red, smile too bright. I watched from the window as she pulled away, the knot in my stomach twisting tighter with every inch. When her car disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my laptop, pulled up the security camera feed I'd installed last week without her knowing, and clicked through the files. Sure enough, there she was, slipping out at 11:30, adjusting her hair in the mirror, eyes flicking nervously to the door. A few minutes later, Jake's Mustang rolled into the driveway. I watched through gritted teeth as she climbed into the passenger seat, one hand resting on his thigh, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. My hands shook around the mouse, but I forced them steady, copying the files to a flash drive. That would come in handy later. By the time Jenna came home that night, I was in the kitchen, stirring spaghetti sauce, the flash drive buried safely in my office. She kissed my cheek, fingers brushing my waist, and I managed to smile, barely. How was lunch? I asked lightly. Oh, you know, she laughed. Too bright, too forced. Same old, I hummed, stirring the sauce. Sounds nice, I said softly. Her smile flickered, eyes darting away. Yeah, she murmured. It was. The third move was personal. Landry was a smug bastard. Everyone knew it. I cornered him in his office, leaning casually against the desk, fingers steepled. A polite smile stretched across my face. He didn't look surprised to see me, just leaned back, smirk pulling at his mouth. Tom, he drawled. To what do I owe the pleasure? I slid the flash drive across the desk. Thought you might want to see this, I said coolly. He arched a brow, plugging it into his laptop without a word. The footage played in silence. Jenna, hair tousled, giggling softly as Jake pulled her into his arms, lips slanting over hers. Her voice, hushed and breathless, whispering secrets about my clients, my projects, every detail Jake needed to bury me. Landry's smirk faded, eyes narrowing. Well, he muttered, voice tight. That's interesting. You helped me take him down, I said flatly. And you can have his contracts. All of them. He stared at the screen, fingers tapping absently against the desk, then huffed a low laugh. You've got yourself a deal, he drawled. I smiled. Pleasure doing business. By the weekend, everything was in place. I moved through the days in a haze, mind racing, chest tight, forcing smiles and kisses and casual laughter every time Jenna glanced my way. She didn't seem to notice the tension, the way my hands shook when she touched me, the way my eyes lingered just a second too long. She was too busy planning her escape. But on Sunday night, she stumbled in late. Hair mussed, cheeks flushed, smelling faintly of Jake's cologne. I watched from the shadows of our bedroom, eyes narrowed, hands twitching with the urge to grab her, to scream, to tear down every lie she'd built around us. She hesitated at the door, eyes flicking to my side of the bed, chest rising and falling rapidly. For a moment, guilt flashed across her face, raw and uncertain. But then she squared her shoulders, fingers tightening around her purse, and slipped into bed without a word. I lay awake beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling, breath coming in shallow pants, her warmth seeping into my side. Her fingers curled absently in my shirt, lips brushing my shoulder, and I clenched my fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. Let her sleep. Let her pretend. Because by morning, every lie she told was going to come crashing down. Monday dawned bright and clear. Jenna left with a smile, a kiss, and a soft laugh that twisted like a knife between my ribs. I watched her drive away, heart pounding, rage simmering hot and steady beneath my skin. I waited until she was gone, then slipped into the office, fingers flying over the keyboard. The email went out in seconds to every client, every board member, every investor Jake had tried to steal, every last name in my contacts list. Screenshots, bank records, contracts, all of it attached, all of it documented. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Then again, and again. Calls, texts, voicemails flooding in one after another. Clients, friends, even Jake himself, voice cracking with rage. I let them ring. And then, finally, Jenna's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, heart thundering, thumb hovering over the button. When I finally picked up, her voice was a low, desperate whisper. "Tom," she breathed, voice trembling. What did you do?" I smiled, slow and cold. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, eyes narrowing. "I just leveled the playing field." The silence on the other end of the line stretched thin, brittle. I could hear Jenna's breath, shallow and hitched, could almost picture her standing there, phone clutched in trembling fingers, eyes wide and panicked. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Tom, what did you do?" she choked out, her voice raw and panicked. "I told the truth," I said flatly. "Sent everything to your boyfriend's clients, the board, and every investor he tried to steal. By now, Jake's bankrupt, and you're both out of options." She sucked in a breath, a broken sob crackling through the line. "Please, we can fix this. I never wanted. You never wanted to get caught," I snapped, the rage flaring hot. "I loved you. God, I would have done anything for you. But you threw it all away for him." "Tom," she begged, voice cracking. "Please, let's just talk. Don't bother." I cut in, chest tight. "Your stuff's on the lawn. Papers are on top. You've got a week to sign, or I'll see you in court." She broke then, sobbing, but I hung up and tossed the phone aside, hands shaking. I sank onto the porch steps, watching the sun dip below the trees, the weight of it all pressing down until I could barely breathe. Jenna came by an hour later, mascara streaked, stumbling up the driveway with wide, red-rimmed eyes. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, whispers spreading, but I didn't move from the porch. She stopped short at the sight of her suitcases dumped on the lawn, hands trembling, a strangled sob clawing its way out. "Tom, please," she gasped. "This can't be. Just give me a chance." I met her eyes empty and cold. "You made your choice," I muttered. "Live with it." She crumpled, clutching the divorce papers to her chest, eyes pleading, but I just turned back inside, door slamming on her sobs. The first night alone was brutal, silence ringing in my ears, memories clawing up from every shadow. I stared at the empty side of the bed, at the indent on her pillow, and took a shuddering breath, chest tight and aching. But by dawn, the rage had burned out, leaving only the hollow numbness behind. It was over. She was gone. And maybe it would take years to stop seeing her face every time I closed my eyes, to stop feeling the betrayal like a knife in my gut. But I'd survived. And for now, that was enough.